This is the Classical Ideas Podcast. Welcome to episode 10 of the Classical Ideas Podcast. This is Greg Soden. So, how did I wind up a teacher who cares about religions from places I've never visited? Why do I care about the diversity of ideas from the nations around the world? The reason I'm curious about such topics comes from a series of experiences I was privileged enough to have. In 1998, I had the great fortune to be sent to England by my parents. I went on a school tour and I was chaperoned by my 8th grade English teacher. This trip was an essential point in my life with regards to curiosity and learning and diversity. As a young person on the cusp of high school, I went through passport control, sought to understand accents, was exposed to new foods, new customs, new landscapes, and new identity. Little did I know I was undertaking an exodus towards a path that would have never opened up otherwise. This trip instilled in me a hunger for something that I still can't really describe. To me, standing at passport control, riding the London Underground, and looking out across the countryside near Stonehenge are the collection of moments that I, in a sense, opened myself up to curiosity. The themes tying modernity to antiquity, namely, why are we here? What's the point of all of this? These questions became relevant. In 2004, I traversed England, Ireland, Italy, Belgium, Germany, Austria, the Czech Republic, and the Netherlands. I absorbed what history had to offer me. I saw churches next to synagogues, next to mosques, next to temples of Buddhism or Hinduism, and an entire museum filled with Vincent van Gogh paintings. On train rides, I would take off my headphones and listen, and I would hear 10 to 20 languages being spoken within any given 10 to 20 minutes on the same train within only 10 to 20 rows. I stood in the greatest squares of Europe, where leaders, good and evil, have stood and proclaimed unity or apartheid, progress or regress. We walked through the neighborhoods where the rich and poor lived under those eras of leadership. So, were the people who had lived in these neighborhoods in Europe like me in any way, with my cultural lenses? What were their ideas? What did they believe? What did they practice? How were they alike and different from all that I had ever known to be quote-unquote true? I immediately felt myself grow smaller in the world with these experiences, yet I also felt more connected and curious. It is then that my goal in life became to be, instead of being successful or rich or being a homeowner, but instead to be just curious, to seek to challenge myself with new ideas and to meet as many people as possible from as many places as possible. Being on a train changed my entire life. So to me, 2004 is the moment in my life where curiosity, not necessarily financial success, became the meaning of life. Moments like these are what allowed me the great fortune of becoming a religious studies teacher. Without these moments, I wouldn't do what I currently do, nor would it even occur to me to try. In 2006, I received an email from the University of Missouri College of Education, and the subject line read, International Teaching Job Fair, University of Northern Iowa, February 2007, register now. And so obviously, you can guess what I did. 2 months later, I was standing in a frigid Iowa winter, interviewing for teaching jobs in Austria, South Korea, Thailand, Venezuela, Mexico, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. So a school in Mexico, in the northern part of Mexico, about 7 hours south of El Paso, Texas, put in the first offer, and I accepted a contract. And then from 2007 to 2012, I lived abroad in Mexico, England, and Canada. I made friends from all over the world, and I returned to the United States a completely different person than when I left. I'm so privileged to have been able to do the things that I've done, and I fully recognize that not everybody has these chances, But as far as teachers go, I wish every teacher had the chances that I've had. I gained so much from these experiences because I reminded myself as often as I could how lucky I was to meet the people I did and be welcomed by the countries that I lived in. It was in the countries that I lived in that I actually became what I consider to be a decent listener. I met and talked to and laughed with and learned from the encounters I had with people from all these different countries. I changed. I was supposed to be a teacher when I was abroad, but I was really just a student masquerading as a teacher. These experiences made my life something that it never could have been otherwise. I came back from Mexico and England and Canada a different person, and I can never see the world in the same ways again. I suspect it's similar for other people with large amounts of international experiences, and I often find myself craving discussion to talk about the power of international experience. So I'm bringing you that today. Fortunately, I have a friend whose job it is to put young teachers into the exact situations I bumbled my way into almost by accident. Today I'm talking to Dr. Gabrielle Malfatti from the University of Missouri College of Education, the same school who originally sent me that fateful email about the international job fair. I invited her to come on the podcast to talk about the power of international experiences and what her favorite aspects are of her job. Dr. Malfatti professionally puts young people into experiences that will change their lives forever. This episode isn't necessarily all about a religion, which is what most of the episodes on the show are about, but it kind of is. This episode is about the ideas of citizenship, compassion, humanity, and unity. Each of these are found within religious worldviews and secular worldviews. These are views that matter. Dr. Malfatti serves as the Director of Global Engagement and is an Associate Teaching Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Missouri College of Education. Dr. Malfatti holds a bachelor's degree in education, a master's in Spanish literature, and a doctorate in educational leadership and policy analysis. In her role as director, Dr. Malfatti leads efforts towards the internationalization of educator preparation. In 2013, she established the Mizzou Ed Teach Abroad program, which is designed to give pre-service teachers an opportunity to internationalize their preparation with international co-teaching experiences and cross-cultural mentoring. In 2014, Mizzou Ed Teach Abroad was recognized with the NAFSA Region 4 Most Innovative International Initiative Award. This is a spectacular program for young people, and Dr. Malfatti specializes in placing students in a school in Bangalore, India. So she's also a founding board member of the Ashera Foundation. She serves on the advisory council for the Vidyashilp Academy in Bangalore, India. Dr. Malfatti has led multiple workshops and presentations on leadership, international education, and intercultural issues in the U.S., Canada, her native Colombia, Cuba, England, Ghana, India, and Thailand. Dr. Malfatti is originally from Colombia in South America, and she currently resides in Columbia, Missouri. And it is my great pleasure to have her on the Classical Ideas podcast. So without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Dr. Gabrielle Malfatti. Welcome back to the Classical Ideas podcast. This is your host, Greg Soden. I'm here today with Dr. Gabrielle Malfatti. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So we have kind of an unorthodox conversation in front of us because, as I've told you before, this is a podcast that's mostly about religion. And we're going to kind of touch on that a little bit today, but the reason I wanted to talk to you in particular is because you have a hugely influential role in doing the job that caused me to become sort of the person that I am today. You weren't a part of my undergraduate years in college, but you are the person that does for other people what somebody else did for me 11 years ago. And so in order for me to think about how I came to this role as a religious studies teacher, which is an odd profession indeed, I have to think often about how I became what I am today and like why I care about the things that I care about. And there's a series of experiences that led me to that point. And I see you as kind of like a conduit for people who do those kinds of things. So kind of really what I want to start with is if you can just tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, if we go back to the very beginning, I was born and raised in Colombia, South America, and I was raised in Colombia at a time when liberation theology was part of the doctrine of the Catholic Church, at least in the parish that we attended. So I think that my spiritual journey began in Colombia by attending an all-girls school, which created a very different set of circumstances for us. Also attending the parish that we attended, and because we had a farm in the mountains that was a vacation home and we had a house in the city, I think that what we were being talked to about in the church when it came to issues of spirituality and social justice was very, very evident to me as I transitioned back and forth between the city and the rural community, where privilege was always ours, but not everyone else's. I came to the United States on vacation and visiting family, and it was one of those flukes of life where one evening I was speaking with my brother, and he said, you know, it's so silly that Colombian kids go to the university and then they come to the US to learn English so they can get a job back in Colombia. You should just stay and then go back to the university speaking English. And I looked at him and I said, there's no way my dad's going to let me do that. And he said to me, what is he going to do? Come and pick you up? And at that moment, I felt my heart racing. And I went to bed that night and my heart was still racing. And I kept thinking about that phrase in my head. And the next morning, I called him and I said, hey, Jose, did you mean what you said last night? And he was like, what did I say? And I said, you said that I could stay and learn English. And he said, yes, there are ESL schools and you could apply. And at that time, one could change their immigration status while here in the U.S. from tourist to student. That is not an option for people anymore. So before I knew it, I was enrolled at South Philadelphia High School. And in a way, being there at a school with 2,000 students, 48% white, 48% Black, the rest of them came from all over the world. This was a magnet school, and I had never been in such an environment. And all of a sudden, I realized that I was given an opportunity to invent myself. I was in that neighborhood. I was nobody's daughter, nobody's cousin, nobody's sister. I was just Gabrielle Malfatti, and I could become whoever I wanted to.
Did you have any English skills whenever you enrolled at South Philadelphia High School?
I did. I had attended a really good school in Colombia, and we had English classes since we were in kindergarten, but I had never had to speak it. So it was kind of all in the hard drive, but it had never been used. But I would say within 6 to 8 months, I was navigating life in English in the United States.
So from South Philadelphia, where did life take you after graduation?
Well, it's been a series of what it's felt like angels opening doors just at the right time. My family had friends who lived in Jefferson City, Missouri. And at that time, one of those friends had a daughter, and I came and lived with them pretty much as an au pair. They lived two blocks away from Lincoln University, and I enrolled at Lincoln. Again, processing a student visa back then was a very different proposition. And so before I knew it, I was at a historically Black university with very little background into what that meant. And again, by one of those opportunities opening up for me, because I was an international student and could not work outside of the university, we were given employment in the office of the president, where the professors emeriti had their offices. So I got to meet Black historians and Black sociologists who were professors emeriti of Lincoln, who would tell these fascinating stories of what it was like when Lincoln was a Black college. And I was learning something that would later on inform my dissertation, but I wouldn't have known that at the time.
That's so fascinating. So you grew up in, you mentioned earlier the social justice theology of the faith of your youth, and then you wind up at an HBCU in the middle of Missouri after having immigrated and having gone to high school in Philadelphia, and then landing in Jeff City, the capital of Missouri. That is quite a fantastic journey. I love hearing stories like that because, I mean, my journey kind of is strange in the same way. Like I grew up in the suburbs of St. Louis, went to Mizzou, and then I wound up teaching in Mexico, and then I went and taught in England, and then I lived in Canada. So it's just this series of chance events that just take you from one spot to the next. Life is so fascinating that way, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know that it's too much of a chance. There is a quote by Steve Jobs that said something to the effect that when he looks on the rearview mirror, he can see how all those dots connect. Mm-hmm. And I think that what has become magical for me is that now living in the moment, knowing that it's a dot connecting, has made life so much more exciting.
That's wonderful. So I introduced some of your professional details of like your job and the programs that you run and the things that you do and the services that you provide for young people today in the introduction. But what do you see as sort of like the mission for your career? Like what are you trying to accomplish?
Right now, the mission very simply is to globalize and rehumanize educator preparation.
So did you see that as a gap, as something that like needed to be like a gap in the field that needed to be filled?
You know, I don't think that it's truly a gap because it's happening in a lot of places. I think that it's something that has kind of fallen to the background, but it's always there. And it's always there when you talk to young people who are becoming teachers. That's why they do it. They want that human contact. They want to make a difference in somebody's life. And yet the way that we are structuring schools and assessment, we keep removing and kind of making that human bond that was at the core of the teacher-pupil relationship harder and harder to be of the impact that once it had and that it has in other places in the world.
So whenever the young people that you serve, I mean, whenever they go abroad, I mean, obviously, did they feel better prepared for teaching in like all kinds of different situations they may find themselves in later?
Yes, that is what we hear over and over and over from them, is that after teaching in India, for example, they come back to the U.S. and they see that they can manage classrooms in a very different way. What used to be important to them or what they thought was really important becomes of less importance, and that human connection becomes kind of the center core of what they want to do.
That's so amazing because, I mean, I studied as an undergraduate in the exact college of education that you currently work for, and I did all my field experiences right here in Columbia, Missouri, went to the different high schools, and I thought that being a teacher was just this one thing that, that students see. That's what I thought teaching was. But you don't see the background. You also don't see the decision making that goes on inside the teacher's head on any given day. So if a teacher only has one kind of experience and they only play the game of school in one certain way, then that informs how they can react to and respond to things. So whenever I went abroad and had all these experiences that you're talking about, it changed the way that I think about my day, my life, the material that I provide, the conversations that I have, the way that I respond to quote unquote problems like that arise in a classroom. And it just completely flipped everything that I think teaching is. So I find myself caring and not caring about certain things that certain people want me to do in very different ways. And I see a lot of things as completely irrelevant now that oftentimes are expected of me, because I think about a classroom in such a different way after being around the world.
Yeah, and I think that's something that happens when we do reflective conversations around teaching abroad and relocating back to your home community, is that it takes on that spiritual side, that lighting of a spark versus filling of a bucket proposition, where you look at the students and you see that you're learning from them, they're learning from you, and it becomes more of an interdependent proposition than one where you think I have to perform for a group of 30 kids all day long, and it's a chore. But if you go into it knowing that I am going to learn something new from some kid today, my soul is going to expand by virtue of interacting with somebody in my classroom today, it's a very different proposition.
Were you at the Salman Rushdie event at Mizzou a few months ago?
I have seen him in other places, but not at the Mizzou one.
He said something along the lines of, he thinks that his day-to-day life, that his job is to expand the universe. And I can't stop thinking about that. Just expand your universe. And like, if I were in your job, I think that I would be saying to the students, like, if you have the opportunity to expand your universe, you should do it.
Well, and it's really interesting because in education, we're always so concerned about assessment and measuring. And I remember during my interview with Dean Clay, he said, so how are you going to measure the outcomes of this? And I said, how do you measure the etching of a soul? Because it is exactly what you said at the beginning of our conversation, that these opportunities to go abroad, to be in a school, to be part of a school community, to learn from peer teachers who are vastly different from you, culturally, geographically, their positionality is very different, just changes you. And my students in India, for example, have said things about that just touched my soul. And it's not prompted. That's who they are becoming. They are feeling that expansion. Mm-hmm. And so measuring that one semester out or 2 semesters out, when people like you and I know that this is a lifetime proposition, this is going to keep giving for as long as you are in the profession, as long as you're on your earth mission, it's going to show up.
Yeah, and I taught in Mexico in 2007, 2008, and I still am learning lessons from that experience now. And it's such a long-term thing that pays dividends over the course of your life. It's remarkable. So, for you personally, what does being a traveler do for you? Like, what's powerful about traveling for you?
I think that nothing makes you more flexible than living the comforts of your own home, your own surroundings, and venturing out. Everything from having to secure a visa to go to India or to go to South Africa or to go to Cuba, and then getting on a plane where I tell my students, I said, the moment we buy that ticket, we have surrendered control. Because what's going to happen is going to happen. If we have to switch planes, if we have to switch routes, if we end up spending an extra night in Houston or in Paris, it's just going to be what it's going to be. And then arriving at your destination, I feel so blessed because the people with whom I interact around the world are all educators. These are all people that want to change the world and that think that the way to do it is by being in a classroom supporting somebody else in raising their children. So the conversations that we have are always extremely positive. It's never, there is no way we can do that. It's always, how do we get it done? And so I think that for me personally, that expansion of the universe occurs every time that I have a conversation with an educator abroad, or when I am able to connect one educator in Thailand, for example, to an educator in South Africa or in India, and the two of them go on to do something together of which I'm no longer a part, but I brought them together, and they would have never, ever known about each other had it not been for my relationship with each of them.
That's so remarkable. It's just a giant puzzle, just tying the threads from continent to continent and realizing we have a collective mission as educators to make this world a little bit better than we found it through working directly with young people. It's really a beautiful thing. So what is interesting to you about having conversations with people all over the world? Like, what do you get from interacting with people who grow up and live lives completely different than you have ever lived?
Well, I think that the illusion of completely different gets busted right away. Because at the end of the day, we start talking about children. We start talking about our mom, or I am about to meet with a principal and she says, I have to leave early because my mom has a doctor's appointment. So it doesn't matter where we are in the world. We are all dealing with some of the same commitments to relationships, whether they are to our students in the classroom or to our parents or to our own children. I think that in interacting with people that go about education differently, it's where the universal expansion takes place, and it takes place for my students. And I think that for me, the beauty of it is to be able to speak to a principal in a foreign country who is opening the doors of their school so that my students can go and learn in there. And they embrace them, and those students within 2 days feel like they are a part of that community. And so when it comes to what have you learned from having these interactions, is that willingness of people to allow a foreigner to be in their community and learn from it, give into it, and create something that may not have been there before. And I think that for my personal life, that it's important because I am the third generation in my family to not have children in the country we were born. So my grandmother was born in Austria, had children in Italy. Then my dad had children in Colombia. Then I was born in Colombia, had children here in the U.S. And so the idea of belonging is something that is very, very intimate to me. I want people around me to feel like they belong, whether it's in my classroom, my home. And when I'm abroad and I'm taking these students, seeing how other communities embrace them and allow them to belong is probably the most powerful aspect of my job.
So one of the things that I have gotten is that I have gotten extremely powerful benefits from interacting with like principals and other teachers from all over the world. And as a new teacher going into those exact experiences like you were just talking about, I would talk to the principal in my school in Mexico and the principal and the head teachers in my school in England, and I would struggle immensely going from here to other countries. So the most interesting thing to me about teaching abroad is that when I taught in Mexico, I was not down there having like a completely joyful experience. I was not in England having a completely joyful experience. However, looking back on those things now, they're the most important life decisions that I arguably made for my entire 20s, like the entire decade of my 20s. And so, like, do you see any students like struggling in these moments? Like, how do you like help people overcome in moments like that when they're really struggling?
To date, we haven't had a student who is really struggling. We encounter some of the normal situations that happen on education abroad where students may feel homesick, We've had students who lost a grandparent back in the States and have handled it differently. One of them said, I'm going back to the US because my family needs me right now. I'll be back in 4 days. And she absolutely did that. Another one said, we knew this could happen, and my family had already preemptively decided that I would stay here and then go back to the US. So the struggles have never been in the classrooms, in the environment, and I think it's because of the very strong mentorship that we have set up. It's a slightly different case as well, because I'm taking pre-service teachers who the principal and the teachers deem as still learning. And so they embrace them as students of education versus having hired somebody that is supposed to perform in a certain way and responsible for a classroom.
Sure.
Everywhere that we have chosen to go, our students are under the tutelage of a head teacher, because one of the most important aspects of it for me is being able to relate to that peer teacher or near peer teacher who is very different from you. The teaching profession in the US is very white, is very middle to upper socioeconomic. It's the same demographic. And so for these students to be surrounded by Indian teachers or South African teachers or eventually Cuban teachers creates a situation that they will never, ever encounter back in the US.
Mm-hmm.
So.
That is so unbelievably powerful in the long run for the way that you see the world. All you have to do today is to turn on the news and look at the chaos of the world today, and the situations with immigration and the thoughts and sentiments about immigration. I think there's a lot of connecting that needs to happen, and I think that something that you're doing is you will, in the long term, every student that you work with, I think that the result will be when they see things about immigration in the news, they will think about their experiences and they will think differently about something because they personally know people. One of my favorite things to do in my religions class is to have guest speakers from every different religion. So I'll have Hindus and Buddhists and Jains and Sikhs and Taoists and many denominations of Christians and Muslims and Baha'i, and they will all come to my classroom, and my students will talk to them for an hour and a half, just nonstop, just question and answer for an hour and a half, everything that the students want to know. And I treat my guest speakers kind of like the White House press corps would treat like a press secretary. So the guest speaker is the press secretary staying in front, and all of my students are little journalists just peppering them with questions. But then whenever they go out in the news and they see things about Judaism in the news, or they see things about Israel, or they see things about Saudi Arabia, or they see things about any faith whatsoever, and they can think back, I've met the people that these stories are talking about. And they immediately feel connected, and they feel a little more able to have an independent thought going deeper than what they might see on the news, And I think that that's kind of what that experiences abroad have done for me, especially having lived in Mexico, is that whenever I hear things about Mexico on the news now, I think about the people that I know in Mexico that I'm friends with and have done amazing things in the world. So I think that what your students are going to learn is that they can't paint the world in broad brushes. They have to be very thoughtful.
And they comment on that. I think that one of the most powerful conversations I had with a student last year, she was telling me about her interactions with the Muslim community in the neighborhood where we stay in India. And she said to me, Gabrielle, I am so glad I came, because before, if I saw somebody that identified as Muslim walking toward me, I could feel fear in my body. She said, I don't feel afraid anymore. I can go on a rickshaw with a man that I know is Muslim and feel safe. I can go into their shops. I can smile at the woman and her children walking down the street, and I want to learn more about them. And I think that going into this traveling experiences where you are very far removed from the dichotomies that we have created, from the dialectic that we have created around certain groups, and actually meeting them and going to Eid celebration at their home. This year, we got there on a Saturday, and Eid was that following Monday. And this family said, "Oh, you're here. Please come and break the fast with us." And my students said, "But they don't know us." And it's like, that's fine. And we went, had a phenomenal time, shared with people that have been demonized in our heads. And they, like you said, every time they hear about Muslims or Islam, they're going to remember that family that opened their doors to us.
Do you see your students kind of like opening up in these experiences, like becoming more confident in asking questions about things that they don't know about?
Yes, and I think that's something that we have done very purposefully, is create that safe environment where they can ask anything. The teachers in the schools are very open, and also we have local logistics teams on the ground that are often populated by people who have studied in the U.S. but are from that culture and that country. And so our students feel very at ease asking these people, because they have kind of both the American background and the Indian background or the South African background. And so it's an important environment to create, is that safe place where those questions can be asked.
So what was it that made you want to create those kinds of experiences for young people?
Actually, I came into the college at a time that the college administration recognized that we needed to get students out of the box. And that's what it was presented as to me. I remember having my interview and saying things along the lines of, I'm not a take out of the box person, because then people come back into that box. If I'm going to take anybody out of the box, we're going to smash the box. We're going to stand on top of that box, and the view is going to look very different, and that box will no longer exist for them to get back into. And I have seen that with the students who've traveled with us. These are students who are seeking purposefully jobs in multicultural markets. They are teaching abroad. We have students right now teaching in Taiwan, in Morocco, in Abu Dhabi, in Cairo, in Bahrain, in the Dominican Republic. And it is because their box got smashed and there is no place for them any longer to fit. And eventually, some of them come back to the U.S. and teach in U.S. schools, but they go about it in a very different way.
What do they say to you in their emails when they write to you from the Dominican Republic, from Taiwan, from Morocco? What do they say?
Well, a lot of them credit the experience they had as undergrad for having opened the world as a potential market for them. Many of these students are students who came from suburban districts who were planning to go back to those suburban districts after they graduated. And all of a sudden...
Guilty.
Okay. And all of a sudden... And it's true for a lot of teachers. Most teachers in the U.S. teach within 300 miles of where they were born.
Guilty again.
Okay. And you're not the only one.
But I went, and I mean, I taught in England and Mexico, so I was thousands of miles away at certain points. So I've got those experiences, and I love them, and I'm so glad that your students are doing those.
Well, and like you said, it keeps informing your practice, and you are a very different teacher because you had those experiences, and the expectations we have of children are different, and of ourselves as teachers because of having had that.
So this is a podcast about religion, and like I said in the introduction, all of these experiences that I had living abroad gave me this new path in life that allowed me this gift of teaching about religion. And had I not done those things, I would not be sitting here having a conversation with you talking about teaching abroad on a podcast about religion. It just wouldn't have ever occurred. So I have to ask you about spirituality a little bit as well. Like, do you get any like spiritual fulfillment from these international experiences? Like, what do you like gain spiritually out of these experiences?
A couple of years ago, I came across a book. It's called An Ascension Handbook. And it was life altering in the way that I saw myself. And so I no longer think of myself in identity ways based on what I do or where I work or whose mother or partner or whatever I am, but I am a soul in ascension moving about souls in ascension. So for me, everything is a spiritual experience. And it is heightened when I go abroad because then I am encountering people whose spirituality functions in different ways. Going to India, for example, is something that when I am there, I become something larger than I am when I'm here because it demands it of me. I have to be more patient. I have to be more flexible. I have to be more giving because I am responsible for students. I have to be more understanding because, again, I'm responsible for students who are having a first-time experience. Mm-hmm. And I have to fall in love with India each and every time I go because I have been entrusted with creating that experience for my students. So I talk to some of my Indian friends who live here in the U.S., and they question my desire to keep going back. And they're like, it is a mess. It is dirty. It is dusty. It is busy. Why do you love it? And I'm like, I have to love it because that is the frequency that I want my students to move in while they are there. And I have to make sure that the experience is created in a manner that it is an experience that they will love. Mm-hmm. So I think that that powerful sense of co-creation becomes so intense when I'm traveling abroad and I'm responsible for others, be it my family members or my students. And then the tearing down of walls that occurs when you really embrace in what I have come to deem the 5-minute friendships, where you have an encounter with a woman that sells flowers on the street and you have a conversation about how long she's been doing it. And she tells you something like, I have sat in this place every single day for the last 27 years. And you're like, oh my gosh, I could have bought those flowers and never known that. I met a merchant in Thailand one time, and as I was getting ready to pay, I asked him for his name, and he said, oh my God. And I said, what? And he said, I have done this job for 8 years. You are the first person that cared enough to ask me who I was. And then we had a 20-minute conversation, and he gifted me with a scarf just because of that human connection that was established. And we hear it from the students who come back from their experiences abroad, where if they find themselves in New York City, for example, there was a student who had come back from an experience in Tanzania, and she said, all of a sudden I'm talking to this man who is from Kenya, and I can tell him that I have been to his region of the world, and the connection, the human connection is so powerful because I knew a couple of words of Swahili, and he never expected this blonde teacher from Colombia, Missouri to know those things. So I think that your spirit expands, you become a larger expression, and your universe expands, and your universe projection is far greater because you have those experiences.
Thinking back on all those experiences, it's almost enough just to kind of make you want to weep a little bit, you know, just for the beauty of it all.
It does. You are in awe. I have mornings when I wake up to a text from one of my colleagues in India, and it's like, wow, there is somebody across the world who is thinking of me and sending a message that I would have never ever had I not gone out of my box.
Yeah, I mean, what is that, 7,000 miles?
Yeah.
It's really amazing. And I mean, if I just scroll through my Facebook friends list, it is a cosmopolitan panacea of just diversity from everywhere, from Australia to Japan to Greece to South Africa to Canada to Hawaii. It's so cool.
Yeah. And if we go to the Facebook page, on any given day, I'm going to have posts in 3 to 6 or 7 languages.
And I've got, like, if I think back my first year of teaching in central Mexico, so I was like living 7 hours south of the U.S. border in a town called Torreon, and I was not in like Mazatlan or Cabo or Cancun. I was in like a city of 1 million in the middle of the desert. And the school that I taught at is a completely bilingual school, so the students grow up speaking English and Spanish all the way from kindergarten through grade 9. And a lot of the students go on to schools around Europe, and many of my former students, like one of them lives in Rome, one of them lives in Barcelona, several of them live in Austin, Texas, and they're everywhere. And I think about the teachers that I met in that school, like the teachers who were American and Canadian, and several of them we were in Dallas, Texas. I flew from St. Louis to Dallas, Texas on the day that I was going to start my job, and the city connects in Dallas to Torreon, Mexico on American Airlines on a little teeny tiny 3-seat across plane. And I got to the gate in Dallas, and there were 3 people sitting there with me, obviously American, and with tons of bags. And so we got to talking, and they were all going to the same school as me. So I was like, okay, great. This is my roommate, and these are the women teachers who were living next door to us. And those 3, the first 3 that I met, are still holding down the fort, living abroad. One of them is in South Korea and has been there for several years. One of them is still in Mexico, and he's in Guadalajara. And the other one is I believe she is in Vietnam now. She's either in Vietnam or China. I can't remember which one, but she's been in both. I can't remember which one she's in now. But they're still holding down the fort, like 11 years later,
Yes.
teaching it all over the world. And they are doing it with families now. 2 of the 3 have spouses and children that they have gained living abroad. And they're just still doing it. And it's so beautiful to think about that.
It is. The interconnectivity that you can create by engaging in that type of experience is just unparalleled.
And like they post the most interesting things that I ever read on Facebook, because like they're Americans still living abroad, have lived abroad now for a third of their life, maybe a quarter of their life, and they have a really interesting perspective on the world in general.
I bet.
So fascinating to talk to them about politics and social justice and everything. So I got a huge question here for you.
Mm-hmm.
What's the meaning of life, Gabrielle?
Oh my goodness. I think the meaning of life is to bring meaning to life, and finding out exactly what that means for you. I think that very often we get caught in trying to find meaning or create meaning for other people's lives, and we neglect our own. We are somewhat socialized into putting other people's needs first. And I think especially women tend to fall into that trap. And so adding meaning to your life and what it is that does it, and that changes at different times in your span. At one time, it might have been getting that degree that adds meaning to your life. And at another time, it might be to find that partner and have children. For some people, that may not be even part of the equation. And so, yeah.
It's like creating your own poetry. Love it. So I just want to have like a closing note here. And I just kind of want you to like tell other people like why you, just speaking for yourself, obviously, why do you think that everybody in the world should be curious about people from other cultures and other religions and other languages? Like, Why should we continue to try to care about new stuff?
Well, I know that curiosity is a key word in your own personal agenda.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of curiosity.
It's awesome. And I think that as teachers, one of the things that we need to remember is not to kill our children's curiosity, but entice it. In remaining curious about other people, other cultures, we are implicitly being curious about ourselves, because the way that we operate as humans, if the only point of reference that we had was us, it would be so very limited. And I think that as we move in kind of familial groups and then societal groups, and the larger that group gets, the more you find out about yourself in the process as well. It provides a lineup of contrast that you can't have on your own. And in a way, a lot of the discord that we have in the world today has to do with those people who just want to stay in the very narrow understanding of their own personal values, mores, their own personal physique even. And when you start busting those, there's so much beauty in the rest of the world. 3 years ago, if my daughter had asked me to approve getting a nose ring, I would have said, absolutely not. You're crazy. Piercings are bad and evil and only crazy people do it. But after being in India, where most of my school teacher friends have them, and they're the most beautiful women I have ever known inside and out, when Ali asked this year to get a nose piercing, I'm like, absolutely, that's just beautiful, and it has a different expression. And then we talk about the way that Indian women carry themselves and the jewelry that they use, and all of these dimensions get added to it. So I think that it's the difference between having a tapestry that is all made of one particular thread and having a tapestry that has all these hues of colors and textures, and knowing that every time that you interact with somebody else, your thread is weaving with theirs and a new picture is going to emerge. And some of them are little bitty dots on the tapestry, but some of them take on kind of gigantic proportions in your life. And I have grown to know those as my destiny bending moments, when I encounter somebody with whom the relationship or the conversation points me in a direction that I had never considered for myself, and or them for theirs, and our lives just take a different hue in that tapestry, and something brand new is created.
I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. Those are among the most inspirational words that I have ever had in a personal conversation. And I think that everybody who listens to that closing statement should rewind and listen to that again. Dr. Gabrielle Malfatti, thank you so much for coming on the Classical Ideas podcast.
Thank you, Greg.
The Classical Ideas podcast is written and performed by me, Greg Soden. Original music is composed and performed by Derek Strybig. His music can be found at www.wearewarmmusic.com. Thanks for listening.